Assalamu alaikum student, welcome to another lecture on TEFL. Do you know which method was underway last week? You remember? Yes, we started the method that was total physical response. Alright, before we start the method, let's have a chat. Students, how are you? How are you doing? How is everything? Are you alright? Are you really enjoying this course, particularly this course, the TEFL, right? Or you find it a bit hard? No, it's really enjoyable. Yeah, it should be. If you compare with other subjects, this subject, the TEFL particularly, is more practical, right? This subject prepares you for your job, right? So the subject that will definitely help you. I won't say that other subjects are not important. They will help you, but once you will be in the job market. And this subject may help you, of course, in entering the job market. How? Because wherever you go for a demonstration, so the employer might ask you to demonstrate. The employer might give you a group of trainees if you want to join a company, or employer might give you a group of students. So where they might ask you to have a presentation, to make a presentation, right? So over there, what would you do if the organization intends to hire you as a teacher, as a language teacher, as a lecturer? So definitely your methods would really help you, and organization might ask you that which method would you use and why. So these methods that we have talked about, and one method to go right, that is of course very important method. After this we have one more method that we will start in the next lecture. Clear? So these are very effective, the methods that we have talked about so far. Knowing these methods would definitely help you to review your of course methodology of teaching that you are following, or the teaching methodology that you want to adopt in your career. Fine. So that's why we are talking about these methods, and if you visit around, if you observe different institutions, you will find that at least one of the methods, of course, everywhere is being utilized. Generally, if you find, of course, in the corporate sector, in the companies, or in the private schools, colleges, universities, direct method, of course, is in, and people, the teachers, in fact, teach that language. Of course, in business schools, the subject is business communication, or the subject is ESP. So the method that generally is followed is what? Direct method. But now, after having this course, after attending this course, particularly the TEFL, so now you are in position to in fact exploit more methods in your classrooms. Now you have an idea what is a grammar translation method. You know what is a direct method. You have understanding on audio lingual method, and you know what is silent way, and you also know what is community language learning. And the method that we are talking about these days is total physical response. So definitely, my dear students, the knowledge of these methods would open your vision, and you would easily, in fact, you would be in a position to utilize, in fact, to employ one of these methods, considering the requirements. I'm seeing your students, of course, their understanding, their background, and all that. Fine. So today we are going to start. In fact, sorry, we started this method last week, and today we are going to, in fact, conclude this method, that is total physical response method, very important one. So as usual, what to do? Yes, first of all, we will review the last lecture that we had. So students, what is it? The total physical response method. We talked about is there is a language teaching method developed by, who developed it? James Asher, of course, he developed this method, and he's what? He's a professor in, of course, professor of psychology at what? St. George State University. And mind you that this is the method, of course, this we call it TPR, total physical response, in fact based on the coordination of language and physical movement. Two things are important, right? You move your hands, right? Like I gave example, head and shoulder, right? So, or another example is, what is it? If you are happy and you know it, clap your hand, right? If you're happy and you know it, clap your hand. So again, what is it? Actions. So in this TPR, in fact, the point is, it is based on what? The coordination of language and what? Physical movement, like stand up and the students stand up, sit down and the students sit down, right? Move forward and the students move forward, point to the door and students point to the door. See that? So that is what this method, of course, underlie what is the coordination, fine, between what? The language and the physical movement. So this is what this TPR is based on. On what? On the coordination between what? Between language and actions. If I ask you, stand up, see? So I say stand up, right? And you people stand up. If I say sit down, yes, good, sit down. So what is it? See, here means there is the coordination between language and physical actions. Good, right? And so again, this TPR, of course, what happens? Instructors give what? Commands, right? Instructors give command to students in the again, commands are given in which language? In target language. Well, students, so I was talking about that this total physical response, what happens? The instructor gives the instruction, in fact gives the commands in which language? In the target language. So this is again important. And student, what? They respond with whole body actions. Fine. What the instructor does? He, in fact, he commands or he gives commands to the students. Say, for example, what does he say? Right, he say that move, and the students start moving. And he says point to the door, and student, what? They point to the door. And he gives them command, sit down, and the students sit down. For example, he says turn on the light, and the student turn on the light, in fact, right? And for example, he says turn off the light, and the students turn on the light. See? So this is what means there is a coordination between language and actions. So this is what we see in this method, that in this method, the instructor, what he does, that he gives commands to the students in the target language, and the student respond. Fine. And again, my dear students, this method is an example of what? Comprehension approach to language teaching. Comprehension. We see that what happens in this method, my dear students, that you see when first we comprehend, those commands are comprehended by the students, and then they perform actions. Clear? So unless the students comprehend, unless the student understand, and for that comprehension, what? Input is required. Fine? So that input comes from that listening. So the teacher speaks initially and he acts. The student listen, fine, they don't say anything. What they do? They simply perform actions. So there is input, in fact. So what is comprehension? Student comprehend. And mind you, the teacher, of course, keeps on changing his commands, right? So that he would know that students, in fact, they understand that command and they act accordingly. Is that clear? Fine. So once the commands are given and the student understand those commands and they act accordingly. Is that clear? So this is what mean, again, this method talks about that. And then again, the point is that it is what this talking about TPR, right? Listening is also important. So listening serves two purposes. It is both a means of understanding messages. in the language being learned, in the target language, and a means of learning the structure of the language itself, right? So we remember that we had a discussion on it, the form and the structure of language. See, these two functions we talked about, and in that discussion we saw that function in fact is more important than the form. So here once we are talking about TPR, and we see that the teacher in fact speaks and he acts and the student listen and they respond. So again, listening is there, and this listening in TPR serves two purposes. One, that the meaning, what happens, that of course it's a means of learning, right, of what, of the structure of the language. And second, of course, what, that you see of course the use, it is both that of course the instructor, what he does, that he uses the language and he gives commands in the target language. So it is both a means of understanding messages in the target language one, and second also a means of learning structures of that language. So understanding one, fine, mean comprehension, and second what, also a means of understanding structure, like see imperative sentences. You see a lot of imperative sentences are given in this classroom that you have seen, and mind you that of course the student are children in this class, they are not adults, but again I would say this method can equally be used for adults as well. Fine. So again, grammar is not taught explicitly, but it's induced from language input. See, the imperatives are being taught. Fine, but there is no explicit rules. The teacher in fact does not give explicit rules. So again we see that, well, the grammar is taught, but what, implicitly, right? It is not being taught explicitly. We saw in this classroom that the teacher gives commands and he uses imperative sentences. Which sentences? Imperative sentences. Now what are imperative sentences? Yes, a sentence that gives command, for example. Clear? I say, of course, students, stand up, right? Bring a glass of water, bring a cup of tea, for example. What is it? A sentence begins with a verb. So again, we call it imperative sentences. Order is given. Fine. So this is what fine we talked about. And again, my dear students, the usher, of course, the person who gave this method, who developed this method, in fact, fine, what is it? So he developed TPR as a result of his own experience, in fact. Right, what he did, in fact, he kept on observing his own children, right, and then he gave this method, of course. And you see, this is a very important thing, that observation, of course, he kept on observing his own children, and then after observing his children for long, he developed this method, and he noticed that interaction between parents and children often took the form of a speech from parents followed by the physical response from the child. Right? So see, of course, the parents speak the language and they perform actions. For example, the father says that I drive a car. So what happens, in fact, the sons, I mean, he listens to it. I drive a car, in fact. I turn the car left. I turn the car right. Fine? So what the father says, right, and he also performs that actions. Fine? And this, of course, the child who is acquiring that language, he listens. Right, and then a time comes, right, he starts saying that expression, in fact. Fine, the father says that, for example, radiator of the car, right? So maybe father says that, and he shows that radiator, he opens the bonnet of the car and he shows that radiator to his son, for example, and the father says radiator, right, radiator. So what happens? Now the son says that, fine, and after some time the son starts calling what? It's a radiator. And again the father opens the bonnet, say it says battery, in fact. What? The battery. And then after some time, you see what happens? The son starts saying battery. Is that clear? So, for example, I mean, mother says, I'm cooking something, for example, right? I'm boiling water. Fine. So mother boils water, and what happens? The daughter sees that, so, and after some time she starts saying, mother is boiling water. Is that clear? See, so this is what the point see in this the physical response method that we see, and Usher, in fact, of course, this is the James what he did, he observed his children, in fact, and then he developed this method, that is TPR. And what happened, in fact, he says that, of course, the parents, of course, their actions and their speech followed by the physical response from the child. So in fact, James, in fact, had three hypotheses based on his observation. The first one, there are three hypotheses of James, that the language is learned primarily by listening. The first hypothesis, right? And I told you last week there is a lot of criticism on this method, of course. Some people say this, they have rejected this viewpoint, but that is against debatable. So he gave three hypotheses. The first one is that language is primarily learned by listening. Second, he says that language learning must engage the right atmosphere of the brain. The language learning must engage the right hemisphere of the brain. See, you know that once I told you that, of course, your brain has two parts. Fine, this is what your right hemisphere, and this is your left hemisphere, in fact. But you remember that I've told you that this left hemisphere controls your right side, and your right hemisphere of the brain controls your left side. Clear? And which side is dominant? Which side is stronger? You know it, that your right side is more stronger. And of course, when you see that this left side is left side of the brain, left hemisphere, the term we use, what is, that does more work. So a lot of activities are done in this side. Here is what the music, the prosody, of course, and that's why he says that, well, the language learning must engage the right hemisphere, because language, why? The language is creativity. Language, in fact, creates things. So that's why the right hemisphere, of course, you see what he says, that engage the right side. Third hypothesis, my dear students, that learning language should not involve any stress, right? Like, see, the children, in fact, while learning a language, they don't take any stress, right? And they make mistakes, in fact, of course, and what happens? They enjoy it, in fact. They don't care for it, right? Sometimes the parents correct them, and of course, maybe they accept that correctness, but of course, with the passage of time, they correct themselves. Children correct themselves, and by listening again, there's input. I hope you understand. Clear? So three hypotheses. Who gave this? Usher gave three hypotheses, Jam Usher. That, well, first is that language learning is primarily by, yes, language is learned primarily by listening. Second hypothesis is that language learning must engage the right hemisphere of your brain. And the third one is that language learning should not involve any stress. Clear? All right. So again, this was, in fact, the review again, that the point we try to discuss, that a new general approach, of course, for foreign language instruction, that is comprehension approach. And this TPR, of course, is an example of comprehension approach. And then this comprehension approach lays emphasis on which skill? Listening comprehension. Again, I tell you, and I told you last week as well, that other methods, they in fact speak volume for target language. And they in fact focus on speaking skills in the target language, whereas in this method we saw that this method, of course, this total physical response method talks about listening, in fact. So this focuses on listening comprehension. And then you see, of course, the importance is given to listening comprehension, that first you comprehend and then you perform things. Of course, imperative forms are central in teaching, again, the theory behind what? Structuralism, of course. So imperative is what? Right? Imperatives have main priority. They are in the center. So again, if you see the theory behind structuralism, again, that learning by doing, actions, again, behavioralism. Is that clear? So learning through playful activities, learning by doing, fine. And this idea of comprehension of approach come from child language acquisition, right? So how do children learn? How do children acquire? So is a natural, of course, from that. Definitely listen, of course, the natural way. Children listen, then they speak, fine, and then they read, and finally they try to right. So these are of course we talked about. Today we will of course in fact review various principles of TPR and we'll try to answer which TIQ. What is TIQ? 10 important questions. Yes, so shall I tell you? Yes, goals of a teacher, role of a teacher and role of a student. Second, third thing, what is it? Right? Goals, role, then characteristics of teaching learning process. One, yes student. Next thing is interaction between teacher and student and students. Alright, teacher-student interaction and student-student interaction. Next one, alright, right, what? Areas of language. Which areas of language are focused? Which skills are focused? Fine. What next? How evaluation is done? Fine. How errors are dealt with? And what is the role of student native language? Is that clear? See? So how about the feeling? How feeling the students are dealt with? Clear? These are 10 questions. Fine. I hope you know them. I ask you, my dear students, to know these 10 questions. They must be on your fingertips. You must know all these questions. And once you know, my dear students, things would be easy for you. You will enjoy all these methods. Fine. So please know these. I gave you a tip as well. Just remember R for what? G for goals, R for role, C for characteristics, I for interaction. Fine. Then L for, of course, language skills. Fine. S for skills, you can say. C for characteristics. N for native language. E for, errors. E for, fine. What else? Evaluation. Very simple. Fine. So this way, in fact, you can know all these TIQ, 10 important questions. Fine. So, dear student, yes. What are the goals of a teacher who use TPR? Yes, students, can you tell me? We had a discussion so far. We started this method last week and now we are here. Another lecture on it. Could you try? Okay. So what? Yes, teacher use what? Yes, what is it? Why teacher? What are the goals of a teacher who use TPR? Can you try? Yes, think over it. Try. See, okay, student, fine. You don't know, I think. Let me tell you, of course. Students, well, you had an idea, but you are unable to verbalize the idea. Okay, students, fine thing. Sometimes it happens that you have an idea, but you are unable to verbalize that. So what to do in this situation? Simple, try. Right? For example, one word comes to your mind. Okay, say that one word. Then another word, and then try to, in chunks you can do that. Fine? But never surrender. Fine? So you try and you will see, you will, make of course, a sentence. So teachers who use TPR believe in the importance of having the student to enjoy their experience in learning to communicate in a foreign language. Again, this is important. The point is that, of course, this is the goal of the teacher, that the teacher, in fact, wants his students to enjoy learning a foreign language, right? So this is one, right? Again, we say that fun learning, of course, is there. Here, you saw in the class that the students move, they act, there is a lot of physical activity. So this is, of course, the goal of a teacher, that the teacher who use GTPR, of course, believe in the importance of having their students enjoy their experience in learning to communicate. And definitely, this experience they enjoy. If they perform a lot of actions in the class, so they will not forget those actions. So this enjoy. They enjoy and they learn language, in fact. And this TPR was developed, of course, to reduce stress people who are learning a foreign language. Clear? So this is the goal, of course, very important goal, that the learner should learn, fine, and also they should enjoy this learning experience. And if the learner, for this purpose, the class could be anywhere. We can hold this class in a playground, fine. We can hold this class in what? Of course, in front of television, for example. We can hold this class in a kitchen. We can hold this class where, right? So anywhere, of course, it can be held in a garden. It can be held, of course, at a road, for example. So fine. It can be held in front of the college, in front of the school, in front of your university. Because what you need some actions, and then you have to have specific environment so that people would perform those actions, and definitely that learning, of course, becomes experience, and becomes what a wonderful experience for the learners, and they learn and they never forget that. Clear? So again, that of course to reduce the stress of the learners, people who in fact want to learn foreign language. So this goal, of course, now you can review other methods as well, that in almost every method, of course, we saw that the fun, of course, and the relaxed mind, right, in fact learns a language, of course. And if the mind is under stress, so learning would not proceed. Learning would be what? Poor. But if the learner is fresh, if there is no stress on him, so he can move on. So this is what the goal of the teacher. Of course, the teachers want the students to learn the language. Fine. How? In an enjoyable way, and their experience should be wonderful, and also, yeah, they should be able to communicate in that the foreign language, and the point is without having any stress. Right. Well, next question. What is it? Now we talk about goals of a teacher. Now, role of the teacher, and what is the role of the students. Right. So what does the teacher do here? You see, the teacher, right, he initially, he gives some directions, of course, in native language. Then he speaks and acts, in fact. The teacher, he speaks and acts. And the students simply listen and follow. So that's what, of course, the teacher is the director in this method. Right? So the teacher, initially what we see in the beginning, what we see, that this teacher is the director of all the student behavior, and the students are imitators of her non-verbal model. So teacher makes a model, in fact. He in fact speaks and then he acts. He stands up and he himself will stand up. That, of course, the teacher stands up and the teacher sits down. And mind you, in this class that we see, the teacher is a female, of course. So we see that she sits down and then she stands up. Clear, students? So that's what, of course, we see that the teacher becomes a director of all the students' behavior, and other students, they imitate him, in fact. They copy teacher. Fine, students? All right. So talking about the role of the teacher, at some point we see that, well, usually, of course, after 10 to 20 hours of the instruction, some student will be ready to speak. Initially, in fact, the students simply listen and they act. They don't say anything. What students do, simply they listen to the instructor, and whatever instructor directs, commands, they simply follow. Clear, students? And then, of course, after some time, what happens, that student, in fact, they speak also. Not all, but initially, of course, the teacher asks a student and he speaks. So after some time, you see, initially we see that what we do in this method, that the teacher makes students listen. And after some time, the students start speaking as well. So the point is that at this point, of course, also once the students start speaking, so there is a reversal. The role the role changes, in fact, and the role reversal, we call it, that now the student gives commands and the teacher and the students follow. Clear? So there is a role reversal, of course. So that's why when we talk about the role of a teacher here, initially teacher is director of the student's behavior. He gives commands and the student respond. Then after some time, the student, in fact, of course, takes the charge. Student gives command and others follow. So see, the role of the teacher, director initially, and of course, initially the role of a teacher is only a listener. He's a good listener. But after some time, yes, he becomes a good speaker, and he takes the role of the teacher. He gives commands and the teacher and the student follow. Clear, students? I hope you understand. So initially teacher is director, fine, and then the student is listener. After some time, even the student can become director. He in fact directs, and he directs even his teacher and also other students. Third question, my dear students. So first one was goals of a teacher using this method. Second, role of the student and role of the teacher. Third one is characteristics of teaching learning process. Good one. See, student. Okay. Now again, when you see the characteristics of the process, so there are two phases, my dear students. Well, you have seen it. The first was what? That there is a model, in fact, right? So a lesson is one of modeling. Fine, because the teacher, in fact, he has to, can communicate some commands to his students. So he has to, in fact, teach some command to the students. What he does, that he, in fact, stands up and he says, stand up, right? And then sits down. So what is it? And he sits down, right? He says, point to the window, point to the door. So what is, in fact? See, so there is a model, in fact. There is a model. So initially what? The teacher, in fact, gives a model, and he himself, in fact, acts all those models. So that is what we see, an important element of this the process of teaching learning, that instructor issues commands to a few students and then performs the action with them, right? Again, the teacher, of course, because he is definitely director initially of course in the phase. So what he does, that he in fact says, he speaks some commands and he follows, and he also brings 4 students in front of them, and those 4 students follow the teacher, and then of course those 4 students help the whole class. Initially, of course, after some time, even one student comes and he does all that. In the second phase, what happens, students? So these same 3 students, in fact, they demonstrate that they have understood the commands by performing them alone, in fact. So of course, the point is that once the teacher does it, the students see, just listen, and then 4 students are picked from the class, they're chosen from the class, they come and then they do all that. The teacher, of course, again gives them commands, and they follow. And then even the one student comes, of course, and then he follows the command. Please read the class proceeding. Things would be clear to you. So again, after this, what happens? The teacher next combines, in fact, recombine the commands to have students develop flexibility in understanding unfamiliar utterances. So there are some commands which are familiar, and there are some which are unfamiliar. So teacher recombines those commands, right? So again, that students would not memorize those commands, but they should link the semantic with that command. They should link the action with the command. So what happens? And these commands may be, of course, humorous. For example, jump on the desk, for example. Fine. So this is again that students laugh at that. So after learning to respond to some oral commands, what happens? The student learn to read and write them. For example, the teacher, in fact, writes commands on the board, and the students copy that command. So meanwhile, they are ready to speak and become, of course, one who issues the commands. See, so we see that, of course, if we talk about the teaching learning process in simple words, in total physical response, so what happens is that the teacher gives them the model, fine, and in fact he makes people practice the language and the action. Students, in fact, perform action. So and how students learn that action and how they link that language with the action, because they see their teacher doing it. Fine. And they also see their colleagues doing it. So once they see the teacher doing it, and then they see the class fellows doing it, and then they, of course, everybody learns it. In fact, every student in the class, he can easily link that of course language item, that the command, with the action that is performed in the class. Is that clear? So this is what, and then once the student feel that they have got all those commands, and they can link easily those commands with the actions, so they start speaking as well. Fine. So dear students, in fact, if you move on, the fourth question is, 3 questions: goals of a teacher, role of a teacher, third one is characteristics of teaching learning process. Fine, students. So now this question is the nature of student-teacher interaction. And what is the nature of student-student interaction? Clear? Yes. So what happens, students, in fact, as far as the teacher-student interaction is, the teacher talks to the whole group of students and with individual students. Right? He talks to the whole group initially, in fact, and then also he talks to the 4 students that he brings in front of the students. Is that clear? So he also talks to the group, and he also talks to what? Individual students, and he also brings one student at the in the mid of the this session, and that student in fact follows the commands, and it means that he has understood all those commands. And students perform the actions together. Right? Student can learn by watching each other. Of course, when everybody performs an action, when everybody says that head and shoulder, knees and toes, so definitely students learn from others as well. They have seen their teachers doing it, they have seen their colleague in fact doing it, so now they can also see their friends who are standing beside them. They can learn from them. So this is what, see, that students, then they perform actions and everybody performs. So again, and people, still of course when they perform an activity in chorus, so of course they correct themselves. So this one is, my dear student, that what is the nature of student-teacher interaction. So in simple words, that the teacher talks to the students, and he also talks to the individual students. Second thing is that student-student interaction. We see, yes, of course, students interact with one another, and they see others performing actions, and then they perform all those actions and also link that command with the action, in fact. Next question, my dear students, simple. How are the feelings of the students dealt with? So TPR, of course, we discussed initially that it was developed to reduce the stress level of the student, and again we will say that, of course, a fresh mind, a relaxed mind learns a foreign language faster than a stressed mind. So that's why, of course, this method was particularly developed to reduce the stress level of the learner who is trying to learn a foreign language. Another way to relieve anxiety is what? To make language learning as enjoyable as possible. And of course, these activities, physical activities are there. So definitely, these activities, once students perform and they learn and they link with the action, so yeah, they enjoy it. It's an enjoyable activity. And then, of course, feeling of success and low anxiety. Yes, once they feel that they have learned one command, it gives them a sense of achievement, right? It gives them a sense of satisfaction that they have done something. Fine, they in fact, they feel happy, of course, and once they feel that they have done something, yes, they start a new command with a big heart. They feel that, well, it's their achievement, they have learned this command, now it's a time to move on, in fact. So in that rhythm, of course, in that excitement, they move on. And obviously that of course, when they learn in this temperament, with enthusiasm, fine, with full of spirit, so they learn it well. Clear? No? Alright, so 5 questions we have done. How many? 5. First one, goals of a teacher. Second one, right, role of a teacher, role of a student. Third one, characteristics of language learning process. Fourth one, yes, student, what is it? Try it, what is it? Yes, nature of student-teacher interaction. Fine. Fifth one, how are the feeling of the students dealt with? Clear? So here, sixth one, how is language viewed and how is culture viewed? We have been discussing so far that culture is inseparable. Fine. So just as with the acquisition of native language, the oral modality is primary, of course, so oral. But again, for oral, we know that, well, listening is important for speaking. So that's why good listeners are good speaker. So again, this point you can debate on that. But the point is, generally we say that good listeners are good speakers. So is the case here, and we follow that natural process of language acquisition. We see children, and of course James Asher did the same. So how did he develop this method? He developed his method by observing his children, acquiring language. So, and then he saw that, of course, he developed that relation between parent and children. So that's why here, of course, the language acquisition and the focus is on what? Modality, on what? You see, oral modality is primary, is oral skills, in fact, the speaking skills. But for speaking skills, you have to have good listening skills. And of course, culture is a lifestyle of people who speak the language, what? Natively, in fact. So this is what the language is viewed, that we view language, of course, as of course, it is language acquisition. Just as with the acquisition of the native language, the oral modality is primary, that of course communication is the purpose. And then culture is, of course, the way. Culture is your beliefs, culture is your lifestyle, culture is the way you live your life. Seventh question, my dear students, seventh principle, that what areas of language are emphasized and what language skills are emphasized. Simple. Vocabulary, we see different commands are there, and then grammatical structure also emphasized over other language areas, right? So we see a lot of commands, right? And then imperative sentences are there. So again, imperative, a command, of course, given a grammatical structure, and then vocabulary, of course, new word. Teacher introduces new words, he introduces new commands and all that. And then understanding the spoken word should precede its production, right? You produce, but for that production, you have to have something. So understanding is important, and that's why the teacher makes student listen. Fine. Once they understand that the command, that the word, and they link it with an action, right, then they can do well. So here we can, we can have different examples that, well, when you teach a vocabulary item and if you have a picture with it, so definitely you can do it well. Students can link that word with a picture, and you know that a picture worth 1,000 words, right? So if a verb is there, if a word is there, and you show the picture of that word, so of course retention would be high, student would retain that. And here goes, maybe you of course remember that MIT theory. What? Memory, in fact, memory trace theory. Fine, MTT. So that theory, what it says, that theory says that you can retain attributes of an object more than the object itself. Clear, students? So understanding what? The spoken word should precede its production. We saw that, yes, first you comprehend, first you need input, lots of input, and then you will be able to produce. This was the seventh principle. Now, eighth one is the role of the student's native language. Yes, we saw that initially, of course, we saw that the teacher directs in L1, but later on we see that, of course, the process of the teaching learning was in target language. So that we see that, and after the introduction, really would the native language be used, and meaning is made clear through body movements, right? This is important. That is, initially, of course, we used L1, but now after that we moved on to body parts, actions, and we didn't use what this we communicated only in the target language. So we never used L1, of course, after the initial phase. The ninth question, my dear student, what is it? That how is evaluation accomplished? Yes, it's very important that when you design a course, when you design your activities, you keep the principles in mind and of course method that you follow. So then you have to evaluate your students, that of course how would you evaluate them? So in this TPR, see that, well, teacher will know immediately whether or not students understand by observing their actions. So evaluation is done, in fact, when the teacher feels that the student in fact can easily, of course, coordinate an action with the language, so it means there is evaluation, they have learned it. And teacher keeps on checking that, of course, once the teacher gives a new command, right, that can be to check whether the student has memorized the old one or he has listened the new one. And if the student acts as per the new command, so it means, for example, the teacher says, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. So student do it. In the meantime, sometimes he says point to the door. So again student point to the door, right? And this again says stand up, sit down, point to the door. Stand up, sit down, point to the door. Then again the teacher says move forward or march. Clear? So what is it? See, so a novel in fact command is given. So this shows that the student are listening and they are in fact of course registering the command, and they have also learned how to link that command with the action they are supposed to perform. Clear, students? So again, if we move on, the formal evaluation can be conducted simply by connecting individual students to perform a series of actions. Yes, it can be done, right? Or if students become more advanced, their performance of skills they have created can become the basis for evaluation, and students enjoy these activities. For example, you can give an activity to students so they can write a skit, of course, and they can perform that action. Fine. So again, here the point is that once they write a script, they have to be creative, and then they perform that script, so their learning would definitely be more. Is that clear? So then of course last question is there of this method, that how does the teacher respond to student errors? This is important, right? And does the teacher directly corrects them? No. What he does, that of course the student will make errors when they first begin speaking, and it's a good thing. They make errors, it means they are learning, of course. Teacher should be tolerant of them and only correct major errors. One. Second, that even these should be corrected unobtrusively. In fact, not, of course, blatantly, of course, not visibly you can do it, right? You can in fact correct those mistakes without making them realize. So they would not know that of course a mistake has been corrected, but you do it in such a way. So that's why of course these are some ways that we can use to, when the teacher of course uses to respond to the students' errors in fact. Alright. Now, these are some 10 questions that we try to answer. We saw what are the goals of the teacher using this method, and we discussed that. Then we saw what is the role of the teacher, role of a student. Then we saw interaction between teacher and student, student. Then we saw characteristics of language teaching, of course, the process. And then after that, we saw the role of the native language of the students, and of course, how the teacher responds to the students' errors, and how evaluation is done. So now what techniques have been used in this class that we've seen, and what techniques can you use in your class? So we see that major technique was what? Actions, in fact, that we see that so we saw in the lesson, we observed is the use of commands to direct behavior. And why again that you can raise a question that why only the commands, why teacher didn't use any other, of course, the language form. He could have used affirmative sentence, he could have used in fact a negative sentence. Why he in fact of course focused on imperative sentences? Maybe the point is that Asher says that imperative sentences, in fact, a teacher can have control of the students, and if the student act accordingly, as per the imperative sentences, so it is assumed that they would follow other forms of sentence as well. So after Asher acknowledges that although this technique is powerful, a variety of activities is preferred for maintaining student interest. In fact, you can be creative, you can have many activities in the class. So using commands to direct behavior, I talked about this, it's very clear, right? That we observe that the use of commands is the major teaching technique, and of course we have already discussed it, that of course teacher can be creative. In fact, he can think of more techniques. Why Asher, the teacher uses here because he wants to have a control on the students. At first, let's see the teacher of course performs actions with the student. Later the teacher directs students alone, one students, and then student action of course tell the teacher whether or not students have understood. Fine. And then Asher also devises teachers to vary the commands so that students will connect the actions with the language. So this is very clear that when you are giving commands, you need to vary the command. Like I gave you example a while from now, that once you are giving the command that stand up, sit down, move right, move left, immediately you can insert a command that point to the window, right? Or you can say, of course, sit down, stand up, move left, move right, move forward. Then you can insert a command, pick up the thread, for example. Clear? So this is what variety can be had. And students feel successful, of course. Important that, that feeling of students, in fact, they would be happy if they achieve a command and then move on. So that's why, and the point is that teachers should not introduce new commands fast. Teachers should take time, right? Teachers should give time to the students so that whatever the commands are being used, once they absorb, once they follow, right, and they are done with that, they are satisfied that they have absorbed, and teacher ensures it, and then he can introduces a new command, right? And of course 3 commands can be used, right? Of course in a sequence 3 commands can be used, right? That can of course help you. Example, stand up, right? Then what else? See, pick up your what? Bag, fine, and move forward. Clear? So 3 commands can be given. You can say that, of course, stand up, move forward, open the door, and leave. Clear? So of course 3 commands can be given. Okay, now the question can be that how much of language can be taught through TPR. Like in the class we see only imperatives. This Usher claims that, well, you can teach all the grammar features through this TPR. In this lesson we saw, of course, the teaching of imperatives. So we can use tenses also and give examples here. You can see that, well, the teacher asks Ingrid, walk to the blackboard. Ingrid gets up and walks to the blackboard. Then teacher, class. If Ingrid walked to the blackboard, stand up, the class stands up, in fact. Clear? If Ingrid walked to the walked to the blackboard, stand up, the class stands up. See? And then Ingrid write your name on the blackboard. He writes. And the class, if Ingrid wrote her name on the blackboard, sit down. Clear? So this is what the class sits down. So these are what mean that what Usher feels that we can teach many grammatical features through this TPR. Role reversals, we saw in the class that, well, initially the teacher in fact speaks and acts and the students follow. After some time the student in fact speaks and acts and others follow. So there is role reversal, of course, and then also initially student just listen, then after some time, after instructions of 20 hours, they start speaking as well. So students in fact should not be encouraged to speak until they are ready, in fact. So until they have understood, then you can encourage them to speak, of course. Then action sequence, I talk about this, that, well, you can ask the students learn more and more of the target language. A longer series of connected commands can be given, right? So while we did not see a long action sequence in this very first class, a little later on the students might receive the following instructions. See here, we can see that. What? Take out a pen. Fine. Take out a piece of paper. Write a letter. See? Fold the letter. So all these commands can be, of course, given, but at a later stage of a class. Initially, of course, we can start with short commands, with the 1 or 2 commands or with the 3 commands. But once we see that students have learned, right, lots of commands, so then we can give them many commands like examples are given. So dear students, let's see that now we had a chance to experience another method, TPR we call it, and we also examined its principles and techniques. And now you can try, right? Think about how any of these methods, of course, techniques will be of use to you, of course. How these techniques can help you in your, of course, teaching if you are a teacher, and also if you are not a teacher, then also you can think that how these techniques can be a success. You can interact with the teacher, those who are practicing these skills, and you can talk to them. and you can tell them that these are the techniques, and you can design different activities. If you feel that TPR, of course, this total physical method, right, has its value, or if you consider this method more useful one. So there are some, of course, the question you need to ask yourself, that would you use the imperative to present the grammatical structure and vocabulary of the target language? It's the question you can ask, that would you use the imperatives to present the grammatical structure, fine, and vocabulary of the target language? The other question is, do you believe it is possible to teach all grammatical features through the imperative? Like James Asher says this, that it is very much possible that we can teach, and he gives example, right, that we can teach, right, we can teach the patterns, all grammatical patterns through TPR. So it's a question to you. What do you think, by the way? Now, first of all, you need to know what are the grammatical structures, grammatical patterns, and how we can teach those grammatical patterns through TPR. And then, of course, would you want to adapt any of techniques of TPR to your teaching situation? If yes, how? And do it if you can. There are some activities also. Check your understanding of the total response, total physical response, and see. Asher believes that foreign language instruction can and should be modeled on native language acquisition. That means the natural process, the way we acquire native language, so foreign language should be taught on the same ground. This is what Asher feels, and that's why he in fact developed this TPR after observing his own children. So what are the characteristics of this method and that are similar to the way children acquire their native language? This is an activity you can have a look. And one of the principles of this TPR is, when students' anxiety is low, language learning is enhanced. How does this method lower student anxiety? Because they act, they do a lot of exercises, they in fact perform actions. So definitely once you perform actions, so dear students, yeah, your anxiety level naturally comes down, right? And you feel at ease, and learning becomes fun for you. Fine. So these are what another activities there you can apply. That what you have understood about this TPR, right? And although the teacher uses imperatives, she does so in a gentle, pleasant way, right? The way a parent would usually do with the child. So see this one. A lot of target language structures and vocabulary can be taught through the imperatives. Fine. In the action sequence, the teacher has the student pretend to write and mail a letter. Think of 3 common activities which would be used in the classroom. These are some activities that you can have, students. So, my dear students, this was what our today's lecture on TPR, right? Total physical response. Again, I would say at the end that, well, these are the principles we talked about, right? And also we saw different, and we also reviewed the principles, and then we talked about different techniques that can be used in TPR. Now again, it's up to you that whether you find these activities useful for your teaching or not. You have to see it. Again, I would say it is not that you need to replace your methodology altogether. See what can you do, how this method can improve your learning of language, and how this, on the other hand, being a TEFL student, how this method can be a success in teaching a foreign language. So, of course, the method in fact follows what? The natural way that you see, the way we learn our L1, the way we acquired language 1. So that's why Asher developed this method, of course, after observing his children. So thank you very much, students. And we will see in the next class. I hope you have got the concepts. Still, if you have any question, you can ask, no problem. I'll answer you. Okay, no question? All right. So thank you very much. See you in the next class. Till then, it's Allah Hafiz.